Hello and welcome to See You in Court, a podcast that informs you about the Georgia civil justice system, what it means to you, and how it protects individual rights. During each episode, we dive deep into stories, cases, and insights that matter to Georgians. You can learn more on our website at www.seeyouincourtpodcast.org. Join the conversation on our YouTube channel at See You in Court Podcast, and stay connected with us on our Facebook page at facebook.com/seeyouincourtpodcast. This podcast is sponsored by the Georgia Civil Justice Foundation. Your hosts are Robin Fraser Clark and Lestertate, who are both past presidents of the State Bar of Georgia and who both serve on the board of directors of the Georgia Civil Justice Foundation. And now this episode of See You in Court.
Good morning, friends and lovers of the law, and welcome to See You in Court. I am Robin Fraser Clark, and with us here today is our co-host, Lestertate. Fresh back from Dublin, Ireland. Welcome back, Lester.
Yeah, it was a great victory for my Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets over there, and glad to be back home with another episode of See You in Court. I think though, Robin, we've got to respect our non-early bird listeners. You know, we always say good morning. I do too. You say good morning. I'm hoping there's somebody out there, like at the end of the day, says, "I just want to open a cold one and listen to my See You in Court." Court episode.
I think one recording we ought to try that. Like, just have a cocktail hour and we can have bourbon and sit around and talk.
Yeah. Why didn't you invite me to that one?
We'll invite you back, Ivy. We'll invite you back.
It's a true story, Ivy, that when Robin was president of the State Bar of Georgia a couple of years after me, we cut a video. We ought to find this and put it on our website. Website. But it was called Maker's Mark and Ginger Ale, the unofficial official drink of the State Bar of Georgia. So the Daily Report published it and everything. So
yeah.
My only grievance is that you polluted the Maker's Mark with the ginger.
I know. True. Well, today we are going to be talking about the State Bar of Georgia, an institution that is near and dear to our hearts, Lester. And we are talking with the new president of the State Bar of Georgia, Ivy Cadle. We're glad to have Ivy. Let me introduce our listeners to Ivy Cadle. Ivy is the managing shareholder for Baker Donelson's Atlanta and Macon offices and has established himself as a leading dirt lawyer, an advocate for property rights in the areas of real estate, eminent domain, land use, zoning, conservation easements, and commercial lending litigation. Ivy is also a certified public accountant. Ivy represents companies of all sizes in complex business litigation and counsels them on regulatory compliance and data security across a broad range of industries, including real estate, healthcare, financial services, and telecommunications. Ivy is a mediator and a registered neutral with the Georgia Commission on Dispute Resolution. Outside of the office, Ivy serves as an adjunct professor of law at the Mercer University School of Law, where he teaches accounting for lawyers. He is also an aviation enthusiast, and he currently holds a multi-engine commercial certificate with an instrument rating, and we'll learn more about what that exactly means. Ivy obtained his EMT. I thought this was interesting, too, that he obtained his EMT certificate while he was still in high school and worked as an EMT for a couple of years following graduation from high school in Swainsboro, Georgia. Ivy received a BS in biology from UGA, a master's degree in accounting, and his JD from Mercer University School of Law, alongside his beautiful wife, Leslie Cadle. He is a past president of the Macon Bar Association and past president of the American Inn of Court, William Augustus Boodle Chapter. Wow. Ivy, welcome to the show.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here. I appreciate it.
I think the first question should be, how the hell did you do all that? You know, I mean, that's impressive. Very impressive.
You know, you grew up in Swainsboro and you mow the grass every day and you get charged with picking up 8 acres worth of pine cones and you develop a motor, I guess, that just doesn't know how to turn on.
That's a great point. And I'm from a small town, so I know what that's like.
Yeah.
Lester's from a small town, although it's big compared to where I'm from. But I thought it was interesting.
You don't know what you want to be when you grow up, Lester.
Right.
Well,
That's right.
you were headed down the biology path, and then you decided that wasn't for you. And I kind of had the same. I kind of had the same thing. I have a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Vanderbilt, minor in chemistry, and by the time I realized I hated it, already was close to graduation. So I'm like, oh well, I'll just go ahead and get it. But I didn't like it, and I took the LSAT at the last minute and became a lawyer.
I've got a background in biology too. After I flunked chemistry at Georgia Tech and I withdrew from physics because I was flunking it, biology was the only avenue left to graduate. So I took a year of biology,
It's no fun.
I like chemistry. I thought organic chemistry was fascinating.
I still don't know what a mole is. That'd be the most impressive thing to me if you could explain what a mole is.
That's what YouTube's for. Lester, if you'd had YouTube when you were in college, you'd be dangerous.
That's right.
Sure.
More dangerous than you are now. How about that?
Well, Ivy, I've shared with our listeners a little bit about your background, but I'm always intrigued about how you got to where you are in your law career. You've been obviously so successful, and I love to hear that about Georgia lawyers. It's a great way to make a living and do some really good for the community. But tell us a little bit about, you're in a large law firm. Lester and I are both sole practitioners, the exact opposite of what you do. You're in a very large law firm. I didn't count how many lawyers, but I'm going to say in the hundreds at Baker Donelson. How did you get to such a large law firm?
Happy accident is the only answer. I worked at a large accounting firm, and I had no desire to work at a large law firm whatsoever. And so I decided I would come to Macon, go to Mercer. I didn't know it, but try to stay married because they put you in alphabetical order, which means that you sit next to your spouse a lot if y'all share the same last name. And that's not fun because that is too much togetherness for at least where we're at. And I built a house. And so I was, dabbling in things and was not focused on making law review or any of the things that one would normally do to get at a large firm. And so I started with our predecessor firm, Gambrell and Stoles, which had a small Macon office. And I was like, this is perfect because I did understand enough economics to know that if you can get on a larger metropolitan area pay scale and be in a smaller metropolitan area, you can outpace, what your market's doing to some degree. And so that seemed reasonable. And of course, being a new hire, I had no idea what was going on with the firm on a macro level. But at that time, and I did know who was in Senator David Gambrell. Yes. His wife is from Swainsboro. And so, and then the Buck Ruffin, who I went to work with, had tried a case in Swainsboro. And the Richard McNeely, who's now state court judge, wasn't able to be available that week. So my father, who refuses to go to court for anything for the last 30 years, winds up sitting with Buck in court for a week during the Auburn hardware case, which is a reported case, and they got a good result. And so my 1L year, I was looking for something to do, and I called up and said, hey, I might go try this out. And so I clerked there my first year, and then I tried clerking at a couple other firms my second summer just to see what else was out there. And then I was at Janine's, which is the Meat and Three, which is, a good Southern style restaurant here. And the two firms I had clerked with did not offer anybody any jobs. And so I was jobless. I was not at the top of my class. It was February, and I was enjoying hamburger steak at Janine's to soothe my woes. And Buck Ruffin walks in and he said, what are you doing? I said, funny, you should ask. I'm looking for a job. And I went to Atlanta and interviewed and kind of already had some connections to the firm and was hired and had a job offer. And then I show up before the bar. I got asked to just come do some paperwork. And there was this wonderful Battle Act Secretary, Nancy, who was either hammering out some dictation or sitting on the back porch smoking a cigarette. Those were Nancy's two modes. And she knew more where all the bodies were buried than anybody. Nancy greeted me in kind of a brusque huff and handed me a goodie bag. Said, "Welcome to Baker Donelson. This is just awful," because they upended all their technology and everything. So I filled out a questionnaire to get my conflict started, and that's how I wound up. That's how I wound up at Baker Donelson. There was a merger, unbeknownst to me, where Baker was looking to expand its Atlanta presence and integrated Gambrell into its framework, and a smaller group of about 4 or 5 lawyers that we had in an office up at the perimeter, and I just kind of walked into the middle of it.
You hit on what I think is one of the common threads of every great lawyer's career, and that is that you had a paralegal or a secretary that taught you how to practice law.
Yeah. If you could keep Nancy happy and Cheryl, you were doing something right. I mean, and that was just kind of the goal. It's just like, where does this go and how does it get there, right?
So I got to ask you though. So I saw on your biography, that you're not just a shareholder. You're the managing shareholder. Is that something you get sentenced to? And if it is, can you get paroled from it?
Yes to both.
What crime did you commit to get managing chair?
They won't tell you that. That state secret is sealed. And so you don't really know what did you do to deserve this. But in our firm, office managing shareholders serve at the pleasure of the CEO, and we have a wonderful collaborative CEO who asked me that I would be willing to serve. And so I said, yeah, I'd be glad to. And we, that obviously got shopped around the office, and here I am.
How do you manage your time? You're both in Macon and in Atlanta at both offices, and now you're adding the state bar to that. How do you I guess you just spend a lot of time on I-75?
I have a great team is the real answer. I have this, as y'all know, the state bar is run by a terrific staff. My firm is super supportive of the work that we do. We've had 5 bar presidents come through the firm, or the predecessor firm. I have Katie Furr is my assistant office managing shareholder in Atlanta. So she lives about 3 blocks from the office. So when the fire alarm went off on Thursday of last week and just blared for about 3 hours, she was boots on the ground while I was actually nearby. But I just offer that, and she was right there on top of it. We have an office administrator who helps. So there's a real system that allows me to be successful. I've got great staff here in Macon, and I got an associate here and a new associate in Atlanta. So you really learn to figure out what is not in your lane and what other people can do to help you with, and then you have to lean on them.
Let's talk a little bit about your involvement in the state bar. You're now the new president, and we're going to talk about your goals and your platform in just a minute. But how did you first get involved in the state bar? Can you share that with us?
Sure. Carl Barnadoe and I, who is my colleague and former member of the Board of Governors, but at the time we were just a bunch of very young associates. And so Carl said, "Hey man, you need to come to these state bar meetings. The person we work for is real involved with it. So he'll be busy and he'll leave you alone while these things are ongoing." And they have a big party, and there are a bunch of people there that you just need to know anyway. And if you figure out a way to get into leadership, then the firm will probably help contribute towards whatever's going on. And so I went to Amelia Island, and I ran as I call it a state rep, but I think it was a district rep or something. But it was the kind of Board of Governors light version of the YLD. And I found that rewarding. I enjoyed the people I met. I thought we did good and valuable work. And so I would just kind of do the next thing. And John Pinnell appointed me to be the co-chair of the Leadership Academy one year. And then I got reappointed the next year and was on the board of directors for this and that. And then was able to get some good committee appointments and to be involved. And, and then somebody called and said, "Hey, so-and-so's retiring from their Board of Governors seat. I think you'd be good. And then really once I got on the board of governors, it was a matter of people coming to me and saying, hey, I think you ought to do this. Because in my mind, I would have made a run at being president of the state bar like 10 years from now.
Oh, wow.
And that's just what I thought was, but then somebody came and that I trusted and said, hey, you should consider running. And I said, oh, these people are asking me, then they may know something I don't know. And
so I thought at some point somebody's going to say, if lestertate could do that job, damn, you're gonna be a shoe-in, buddy. Just let me tell you,
I hate to name names of who might have said that, Lester, but we'll talk.
Well, I mean, Robin had to come. Was it 2 years after me to clean up?
2 years after you, Lester.
Yeah.
So,
it's important to make the timing right so that you can hang out with your buddies.
Yeah,
at the parties and drink bourbon.
We have a great executive committee, and we just came off of our Supreme Court retreat and joint meetings, and to underscore that, we had a great experience. There was a lot of individual connection and people talking about the business of the bar and having conversations and develop relationships. And so that aspect of it really, I've really enjoyed and come to treasure. You build some relationships with a group of folks. You might know who they are, but you probably would not otherwise know. And you learn a lot about other people, and you learn a lot about yourself. So I second that as one of the most rewarding aspects of this, and especially to be able to do it with other people.
I totally agree. And as a sole practitioner, I love being involved in the bar for those reasons, that I come across and make connections and friendships with people who are fantastic, lovely people who I wouldn't have met other than through the bar. So I love my time in the bar. Speaking of our beloved state bar, you're now president. Let's talk about your platform, your agenda, your goals this year. You mentioned connection, and I read your president's page in this the journal. And what I have it. What a lovely picture of you.
Mostly
and
my wife. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you both look great. And I read your president page, and you focus on that. You focus on connection. I mean, part of it apparently is that you're going to be meeting in person, no more Zooms.
Yeah.
And you talk about the value of being in person. Tell us a little bit about that, the human connection.
Yeah. So, well, first I want to acknowledge that this podcast illustrates what a great tool that Zoom can be. It let three people who live 180 miles from each other, with the sixth largest metropolitan area kind of in between us, get together very conveniently to have a great conversation on a Monday afternoon. So I acknowledge that Zoom is very helpful, and other electronic platforms. What at least I believe is that over time, if you look at the Board of Governors, the number of members who just weren't coming to the meetings. And I don't think that's great for the bar, because I think the lawyers have represented us to serve, and part of service is showing up. I also think that when tough issues come up, if you haven't been together for the dinner, or you don't have a chance to go to somebody after the meeting and say, hey, what do you think about this? And what are we going to do on the second read? Or when I do something as the leader and you can't come accost me about it, right? I mean, that happens too. But I really genuinely believe that one of the great purposes of the bar is to allow lawyers to meet each other so that they can be better lawyers. They can better serve their clients. They can better conform to the rules of ethics, and that we can make policies that better reflect what the body of the bar as a whole wants to see. And so when you're on Zoom, or when you have a hybrid meeting, instead of everybody being able to stand up at the microphone, you're promoting people to be the speaker. They show up on some great big screen. They say whatever they say, but they're not really, like, whether or not they come back for rebut. It's just limited. And it's more of of performance. And I just don't think you have the opportunity to have the dialogue that an organization like the State Bar needs its leadership to have to thrive.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that sounds like something that some old curmudgeon like me would say, because I mean, Robin and I, we never presided over a Zoom meeting,
Yeah.
And of course it was a long time before COVID hit, which is, changed things. I want to ask you just a little bit about something that I always go off on tangents with Robin's outline sometimes, but one of the things when Robin and I were making our way through, I always felt like the bar had the opportunity and did make stands on many issues on many occasions. And one of the things that I've noticed, and has been particularly taught about that, I got sentenced to serve a term on the ABA Board of Governors, which I'm trying to complete. And one of the topics, that's sort of come up has been that after the U.S. Supreme Court decision that had to do with mandatory public employee unions, not bar associations, but unions, that, half the bar associations, if not more in America, they're scared to take a stand, about anything because they're afraid it jeopardizes the mandatory bar in some way. And it seems that there's a lot of people out there, for example, I think it was Louisiana, where they you would think, and no matter how divisive the times we live in, you would think that health and wellness would be something that, lawyers would agree on. But there's actually, I think, a lawsuit in Louisiana against Louisiana Bar for running a health and wellness program, for lawyers, which emphasizes to me a very different environment that you have to navigate now than what Robin and I did, 10 years ago. So how do you, am I right or wrong about that? And do you, how do you go about navigating that now?
Yeah, I don't know that you're wrong. I don't know that it is some sort of death knell for the mandatory bar. I think the interesting thing about the Boudreaux case that you mentioned is that it actually, at least in my opinion, and I'm no constitutional scholar, I'm just a dirt lawyer who litigates. And the interesting thing to me is that it tells us that we have if you want to be a mandatory bar, the ABA is a voluntary bar, and so you don't have to join the voluntary bar. But we have 55,000 members of the State Bar of Georgia, and if you want to practice law in the State Bar of Georgia, you have to pay your fees to be a member. And the State Bar's really primary role is to regulate the practice of law. And what we do really ought to play off of how do we make what is rationally related to the practice of law. Now, the case law is more nuanced than this, but I'm hanging with just broad brushes. And so my understanding of the Boudreaux case, Lester, that you referenced was not so much that wellness was taboo, but it was what is the forum in which you do wellness. And so the State Bar, our State Bar, the State Bar of Georgia, we just voted to move our wellness committee to the Center for Lawyer Wellness, so it would have aspect that is more like the Young Lawyers Division, where it's available to everybody, because wellness is not just for the people on the wellness committee. But the trick is, how does that make you a better lawyer? Not just urging people to do something. I think the Louisiana Bar, one of the examples that was cited was they just said, eat your broccoli. Which I think George Herbert Bush would have taken issue with that. And I'm sure that one of our 55,000 members, somebody has a cauliflower farm that competes with broccoli, and they would take issue with that, right? But I think if we can talk about health and wellness and how do we enable our members to show up for their clients? Because truly, you have to be mentally fit to practice law. And at some point, if you're not physically fit, you're eventually not going to be mentally fit. And you could, even if you have a substance abuse problem, you may be otherwise physically okay, but you have a mental impairment because of a substance issue or a chemical imbalance, whatever's going on. And so I think it gave us some guide rails that just show us it's important to make sure that we're talking about our programs as they relate to lawyers, because we got 55,000 members, and it's hard enough to get a jury of 12 to agree on anything, much less those people who are forced to pay money to the bar that gets used for programming, and they don't have a choice. And so it's not as I guess there are more guide rails than when you were there. And I think then, it would be more fun to be able to do more things, arguably, maybe. But I think it's been good for our organization because it said, okay, here are the things we want to focus on, and here are the things that we're going to get really good at. And the last few years, we have certainly been working on that. And I think lawyer wellness is one of those things. Paula Frederick, who has been our general counsel for a very long time, is about to transition to retirement. We're excited for her. And we have an opportunity to have Russ Willard, the new general counsel, come in and say, hey, what can we change to do better? And so since we're more focused on fewer things, I think we have an opportunity to serve the lawyers of Georgia well, and to figure out how to do those things as best we can.
Well, the test for those sort of things for a mandatory bar, is it germane to the practice of law? And it really, I guess, is, some folks interpret that one way, and I would interpret it very broadly, so that a lot of, just like you're saying, mental wellness, definitely germane to the practice of law. Because if you look at the disciplinary rulings, there's usually some mental illness or health problems going on. So, I don't know how I was there when we had a prior general counsel before Paula, and then I was there with Paula, and that changes depending on who your general counsel is. And it may change when we get a new general counsel. But
by the way, if we're putting the history of Paula, who's been great, and we're going to have the bookends of that, you and I would be the bookends, I think, because she came in, when I was president, and then is now retiring. And of course, it has been great, and we all wish her well. And the type of thing I was talking about with regard to the ABA, I was a state bar delegate to the ABA, paid my own way, no bar dues used in Lestertate's trip. But we've had folks from other jurisdictions who are state bar delegate that would be in the ABA House of Delegates say, oh, well, I can't vote on that. I can't vote on whatever the issue is, because and the ABA, does have some things that are far, far afield from, the practice of law. I'd be the first, to tell you that. But I think more than anything, one of the things that popped in my mind about that is the amount of money that would be spent on that. What lawyer would want to go out and challenge wellness? Which one of the 55,000 or ever how many members they have of the Louisiana bar?
That's the wonderful thing about America, is we can all challenge whatever we want to challenge, pretty much. And I think
true.
The three of us have done pretty well by that philosophy.
That's right.
Ivy, one of the things that has happened since you've become president is the Georgia Bar has a new website.
Yeah.
How did you make that happen? A brand new website the minute you take office.
I give Tony all the credit and all the blame. Tony was instrumental. And there's been discussion around the website for quite some time and how it was organized, and it's just kind of time and evolved such that it transitioned on my watch. But Tony did, like any great accomplishment. Tony did all the work, and it just didn't quite get over the finish line while he was still president. So
for our listeners, it's gabar.org, and it's got a lot. I love it because it has so much helpful information, not only for lawyers but for the public as well. I think it's a great source of information, and I congratulate Tony and you on that. I think it's a great addition. Glad to see it.
And every time you mess with a website or a database, you hold your breath because you think, I hope this doesn't end up worse and not better, at some point. But
where's the zip codes or whatever? Yeah, right. I think we did a good job, and the committee did a good job balancing the degree of change, we'll call it. It has some familiar buckets, so you can know where to go. If something's put in a new bucket, the names and the labels appear to be fairly intuitive. So I think they're going to be commended on that.
What else is on your agenda? Anything else you want to tell us that you are looking forward to accomplishing?
Yeah, so we started at our joint meeting with the court. We spent a long EC meeting and started working through governance issues, which, what is a standing board policy? What's an EC policy? What applies to the membership? What applies to just the EC? And, if a section goes off the rails, I'll pick on the fiduciary section because my wife's a member. But if Leslie goes and decides that she's going to go lobby for a new bill to change how intestate devises work, something that really has nothing to do with the bar. There's really no mechanism for the bar to handle that other than to disband the section, which is like some nuclear draconian option. And so what should, what if you have an issue with an officer that goes and does something they shouldn't do? And so putting some sort of both due process and procedures in place so that we have some guide rails for everybody. We're talking about putting in just a written code of conduct for events and just things like that I think most large organizations have, that we've been fortunate enough for years and years and years that our members usually just stay in their lane and we don't have any issues. But people are people, love them. And so as an entity, I think you need the tools to make sure that if something happens that is reasonably foreseeable, that you can deal with it. So we had a first read on it. And I also just went to Bill Neesmith and Paula and everybody and said, hey, if there's something about our bylaws, rules, whatever that bother you, let's just fix it. And so we just had kind of a brainstorming executive committee session, and then we're going to have another one in October, early October, where we're just talking about how should this work. And I'm grateful to have the space to do that. The other couple of things that are hot are obviously wellness. How do we support the integration of the Center for Lawyer Wellness? How do we make sure that the transition in the General Counsel, Office of General Counsel, is successful? How we also are all seeing the popularization of artificial intelligence. We're going to call it technology because 20 years ago we didn't know we'd be calling it artificial intelligence. So there will be something new in 20 years that we don't know. And so we're standing up a special committee on artificial intelligence and technology to look at our rules to make sure that they continue to adequately address AI and whatever, whatever comes next. But the court has a similar committee, and so we're working hand in hand with the court. Justice Boggs also wants to look at how lawyers are regulated and to see if we can look at some sort of regulatory reform so that we can help a class of people who are not helped by lawyers. There are a lot of legal matters where it doesn't make sense to have a full-on, attorney who's gone to law school for 3 years and passed the bar help with that. And so if you, and it's kind of dragging down our courts because you have so many unrepresented people that don't understand. They're trying to represent themselves and get a divorce, and they're asking the courts for legal advice. So is there a way that look at how we license and regulate lawyers so that more of that demand that frankly lawyers aren't even doing right now, right? That exists because attorneys don't see the value in doing that work for whatever reason. Mostly we think is economic, but Texas has recently done something on this. I think Nevada, there are 2 other states I'm aware of. And so we're looking at what they did, and maybe it is not right for Georgia, but we do think that it's a big enough of an issue, and that the citizens of the state could potentially be better served if we take a look at it. And so those are really kind of the big picture stuff that we have going on. There's obviously budget, programming, that sort of thing that are going on. But my goal is to leave the bar in better shape than I found it, to clean up some of the government stuff that can be updated, to deal with some of this emerging issue type things, and to make sure that our transitions are successful.
And you know, despite your wonderful agenda, you know there's going to pop up some issue that you just out of the blue that now you're just going to have to put a lot of time and effort into handling it. You know, you don't know what it is right now, but you know it's going to happen.
Well, as I've said, it's not what you do for your bar year, it's what your bar year does to you.
Accurate.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So something will happen, and that's why I think keeping it simple-ish, I guess, to something like governance while you have the space to do it, because you know that something else is going to come up.
Yeah. Tell us, Ivy, what would your advice to a young lawyer be? My daughter is a young lawyer. She's practiced 2 years now in the 11th Circuit.
Oh.
Actually, now working with me for about a year.
Yeah.
And I preach to her and all of her friends, get involved in the Young Lawyers Division of State Bar. I feel like that's the best thing you can do with your time. What would your advice to a young lawyer be?
What I tell our young lawyers at our firm is to go find something you like to do. And it seems hard to think that somebody wouldn't like state bar stuff, but I know they're out there. And so what I say is go find something that helps you build connection with other humans who have some sort of intersection with your professional life. And if you will do that over 15 years, what you will find is that you can then work with or for your friends to do your job. And when the phone rings, you generally are not groaning and thinking, oh God, I don't want to speak to this person again. But you're like, oh, that's, Rebecca. And I'm excited to talk to Rebecca today. And we can talk about this project we've got going on. We can kind of catch up on a personal level, and it will enrich my day and be a fulfilling conversation. And so that's what I tell people to do is go find some, as Justice Ellington said, there's a life outside of the law, go get one. And so go find what that looks like for you, and go find something that brings you joy and makes you want to keep doing it, not because you're doing it because somebody told you ought to.
Great advice.
So I'm curious, how did you get into dirt law? How did that evolve, or was that a conscious choice for you?
I mean, I showed up and got handed a goodie bag and got told welcome to Baker Donelson.
But Baker Donelson does a lot of stuff other than just
where the opportunity was.
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to be successful at the opportunity that was handed to me, and did the work to do that. And, once you're 10, 12 years in, the neat thing about the law is you can change areas, but you are in some ways starting over. And I generally like the people that I work with. I like the issues that it touches. I mean, the irony of this whole thing is I got introduced to the law as a career by my father, who took me to the records room of the Manual County Courthouse. And this was in the early 90s, when you could still smoke in the courthouse and when everything was still on paper. So he takes me into this windowless vault and starts showing me how to read what looked like hieroglyphics to me, so that he could make another list of hieroglyphics on this long, oddly shaped yellow pad. And then we could do something with something called title to land. And I just thought, my God, get me away from this as quickly as you can. And so at some point, being from Swainsboro, the other people who were kind of influential were the doctors. And so I was like, well, maybe I'll try that. And he told me he didn't go to medical school because he didn't have the stomach for it. And I said, well, I'm going to figure out if I got the stomach for this. I can go take the EMT class and they'll let me ride around on the ambulance and I can figure that piece of the puzzle out. And I like being an EMT, but and the direct, and you could even tell then because you'd be at the ER and just all these people would come in. You're like, how on earth does this economic, I did at least have enough intellectual curiosity about how does this economic model work? And it just didn't make sense to me. And so my father, bless him, kept telling me not to be a broke lawyer. I should go get some business education, and got into business school and realized I further didn't understand that model and that I would have less control over my kind of destiny, I felt like. And so got done with accounting school and could either go straight to law school or go get my CPA designation, and thought, well, nobody cares about a master's of accountancy, but everybody knows what a CPA is, so I'll go do that. And so I ran from the law, Lester, for quite a long time. And then, I'm sitting at the meeting 3 at Janine's, and lo and behold, here comes this person who litigates dirt law. And here I am 17 years later, still going to a different version of the smoky, musty records room of the Emanuel County Courthouse.
Well, it's obviously worked out pretty well for you, Ivy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's
good
been
decision.
fun. Yeah.
But a lot with all you do in the law, you also have some great hobbies. And I love to follow you on social media because you post. And I hate to fly. I think I've told you that before. I'm having anxiety, even though I fly quite a bit, but I have anxiety. And you're like telling me, explaining everything to me why I shouldn't have anxiety. So I like to watch your TikTok videos of you landing a plane or going through clouds and turbulence and all that. I'm like, oh my gosh. How did you get interested in being a pilot? It looks fantastic, but that's amazing to me.
Yeah, my poor dad, I've talked about this whole thing, I feel like. So he had his pilot's license when he was in law school. And I was always fascinated with airplanes. I mean, you look up there and there's something that you think should fall out of the sky, and there it is. And I just think, and then you layer on the kind of time machine factor. I'm going to Charlotte tomorrow. I'll leave here and I'll be there in 2 hours. I mean, and I'm not in a jet. I'm in what I call the Honda Accord of the skies. And so, it really shrinks your world, and it gives you the opportunity to do a physical challenge, because it is very physical and mental. And I just think it's fascinating. And I've always thought that as a kid. And so he had gotten into an airplane with somebody else and kept harassing me in 2010 or so to come get your pilot's license, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, man, we're paying off student loans and, all this other stuff. And so he's like, man, my buddy will teach you, we'll figure it out. And so he did. And then I went on to get my instrument rating, and then had a friend who had a twin engine airplane who let me fly it a lot because he needed somebody to fly it, and he'd let me fly it basically for gas. And, I just kind of kept doing a new challenge, which is really neat as an adult, because there aren't many things. When you want to get good at golf, you just go grind out lessons, and you're kind of limited by your own physical ability anyway. And so flying an airplane's a closer, I guess, challenge where you don't have to have quite the golf level of hand-eye coordination to be a professional golfer or whatever. You can be a professional golfer.
No, but if I screw up my golf swing, I don't kill somebody, I mean, it's true. Not life-threatening if I mess up.
Well, you got to be meticulous about. I mean, you have to understand risk.
And I know you are.
Yeah.
So, there are old pilots and bold pilots, but there are no old bold pilots.
Yeah, that's right.
That's good. And then another hobby that I love to watch you do is you do a lot of handiwork around your house.
Well, I have. I've been so busy that there's less.
Yeah.
We mowed the grass this weekend.
That kind of amazes me that you're a lawyer or a CPA, and yet you're in there changing out your hot water tank or something.
Well, part of it is patience. If we're being really honest, like if the hot water tank's gone, like I'm just going to go get a new one and flop a new one in there, and it'll be done almost in 3 hours if they hadn't sold me the wrong hot water tank, or if I hadn't bought the wrong one. But like as I said, I decided I'd go to law school and build a house. And so it creates some different neural pathways when you think about the hot water heater's out. And for me, it's less painful to think I'm going to go get the wrench, I'm going to drain this thing, I'm going to take it out, and I'm going to put a new one in, than how am I going to chase down some plumber on Saturday?
Well, but of course, the thing was, you said, oh, in 3 hours it's done. If I tried to put a hot water heater in 30 hours,
Yeah.
would not be done, you know?
Oh, this is the second one I've done in the past 10 years. So, I mean,
I just think, I think it's very, I would never even attempt something like that, but it would end up, if I did, it would end up costing me 10 times what what I would pay a plumber. So I think,
fair enough.
I mean, hats off to you because I'm sure you save money by doing it, but you also get enjoyment out of it.
Do you? Well, you do. That is one thing I like about labor, I'll call it, is you can typically look back and see, look what I did. But you know, I have figured out that as I've gotten further along in my career, that there are some things worth paying somebody to do, to outsource. So it is fun to have some small discrete project. And since I built the house, I've kind of got all the tools already. So you just go pick something up and you just if you can, just do it.
I think it's awesome. Ivy, we're about at the end of our time. I know we have to let you go because of your schedule, but the last question we always ask our guest is about justice. And we've had some incredible answers, and I asked you to be prepared for it, but tell our listeners, how do you define justice?
You know, I've given this a lot of thought, and I really struggle with this because on one hand, the kind of idealist in me says that justice should be literally getting what you deserve. And if I really want to go with my own personal definition of justice, is that it is that the processes and the fortuities of life give somebody what they deserve, or afford somebody what they deserve. And the interesting thing to me is kind of reflecting on it and the actualities of the justice that we deal with, is that the justice to me is a process that is a struggle. And sometimes it is more about the process than it is about the outcome that we see on TV. And it's the opportunity to have an avenue to reach an outcome is justice to me. And so that gets into access to that gets back to the regulatory reform, right? We have citizens in the state who don't have access to the resources, knowledge, whatever it is that they need to adequately engage the process, not to get the result, but to adequately engage the process so that they can be headed towards the result that they deserve. And so to me, I think justice is all about affording people equally an opportunity to engage in a process that may or may not be painful, and most definitely probably gets them towards an uncertain result. But that's the messiness of life.
Well, absolutely well put. And again, thank you, Ivy, for spending time with us this afternoon. For our listeners, we've been talking with Ivy Cadle of Baker Donelson. He's the new president of State Bar of Georgia. You may learn more about Ivy at his firm's website, bakerdonelson.com, and check him out on TikTok, where you can see him land a plane or fly through a storm, which I just love watching.
And if your hot water heater goes out and you need some advice, maybe he could help with that as well. You're gonna be on speed dial next time my hot water heater goes out. That may be the most impressive thing you've told us today, Ivy. I tell you, that's great.
Lester, I'm gonna tell you to call the plumber.
I think that would be good advice. That shows what a great lawyer you are right there.
Thanks, Ivy. It's been fun.
Glad to be
so
here.
Much fun. Congratulations, and I hope you have a great year, Ivy.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Lester.
Lester, now's the time. We had that great visit with Ivy Cadle. Just love talking with him. Now's the time where we share with listeners a little story in the news that caught our eye and related to the law. And you're up first.
All right. Well, mine is a CNN story published September. It was last updated September 6th of 2024. It is entitled "Police Pressured Him to Confess a Murder That Never Happened." It's about a man named Tom Perez who lived with his father and his elderly father, and he called the police and told the police that he thought his father was missing. And the police response in Fontana, California, was to take him in for questioning and to use one of his best friends and to bring his dog in. And at times, allegedly told him that they threatened to, his dog was probably going to have to be euthanized if he had killed his father, and got a confession from him before they carted him off to the hospital. And it turns out, of course, that his father was not even dead, much less murdered, but was at the Los Angeles airport going to visit this man's sister. And it is a fairly long story. I can't give you all the details, recounted them with as much accuracy as I can, but it's well worth the read. And I'm going to sneak in another half story here, because the way I found this was I came across a more recent CNN article. But after this was all said and done, Mr. Perez got a lawyer and he sued the police department. They settled the case for $900,000.
Wow.
And
good for him.
Yes, good for him. And the thing that's funny is that the police are now complaining that the lawyer, they want the lawyer held in contempt of court because they say he outed one of their undercover detectives in violation of some court order, that they had put forward. And the way he supposedly did this was by putting up a picture of the detective giving his deposition. And the very same day that he gave his deposition, I think it was, he received some award that the city photographed him and put him out on television or whatever. It was a public relations type thing. So you just can't make stuff like this up. It's absolutely incredible. But I found it interesting. I was glad that the guy got a little justice. I felt like there was a little sour grapes on the police department's behalf after having been called out for and having to pay $900,000 there. So that's mine for today, and I hope people will take a look at it.
And also it points out the fact that you can have a totally coerced confession to a crime you did not commit. The man's dad was alive.
They actually, if you go and look at the CNN story that they did, they actually have clips from the confession, from the questioning and the hours that went on. It has them bringing the dog in, sending the friend in. I mean, I obviously didn't watch 17 hours of it. It was a couple of 3 minutes on the clip, which I'm sure, was stuff that the lawyer had put together to help make the case. But by the same token, it was just, you're going like, they don't know even anybody's dead, much less murdered. And here they are trying to fit up his son for it.
Yeah. I was thinking when you were talking about it that if I might confess to something if they threatened to euthanize my dog too,
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, my story it centers on the topic of arbitration clauses, which is a thorn in our side. I get so tired of them. Which one way to look at arbitration clauses, which they're everywhere now. Anything you sign seems to have an arbitration clause, and they're trying to take away a citizen's right to a jury trial if there's a dispute. In this situation, there was a couple, and they were at Walt Disney World and having dinner, and the wife was allergic to nuts. And they tell their waiter, "Hey, I'm allergic to nuts. Don't serve me anything with nuts." Waiter says, "No problem. We handle this all the time." brings out their dinner. And you know the story, obviously, when I just said she's allergic to nuts, they serve her some food with nuts. She goes into anaphylactic shock at Disney World and dies. Fast forward, husband is trying to bring a wrongful death claim against Disney in Florida. And the defense attorney for Disney asserts an arbitration clause because the husband had purchased a trial subscription to Disney Plus streaming service on TV 2 years ago.
Which is the ESPN app also.
Yes, ESPN.
I read that same case. So
he just had done Disney Plus streaming to watch a football game, and they raise arbitration clause. I'm just going to tell you that irritates me to no end.
One thing we ought to point out too, I think, is that's what's called forced arbitration. You know, a lot of people choose to resolve their disputes through arbitration, where they say, "Hey, we don't want to go to court. We'll go get an arbitrator or a panel of arbitrators to decide it." You make the decision after you know you've got the dispute. That's one thing, but you're talking about something he signed that had no connection to, and before he went to Disney World, and they served his wife, nuts.
So that is before the court right now. There hasn't been a decision on it yet, and I'll be watching that and report back. But I just the gall of the Disney attorneys to say he waived his right to a jury trial because it was a trial subscription. He didn't even pay for it. Trial subscription to watch a football game, and then he says, "Oh no, arbitration." So we'll keep an eye on that. But I just wanted to point out to our listeners exactly what you're talking about: forced arbitration, where you're signing something and you have no idea of any jury trial right that you're giving up.
You know, I will say too, several years ago, I bought a car, and they bring this thing out. It's got an arbitration thing in it, and I negotiated the deal, everything else, and I said, I'm not signing that. And they went back and marked it out, So if you know it's in it, you recognize it, you can deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, it's been a great show. Good to see you, Lester. We want to thank our sponsor again, the Georgia Civil Justice System. We want to thank our producer, Philip Hoover, and we thank our listeners. And just to remind our listeners, you can learn more about Lester at aikentate.com and more about me at gatriallawyers.net. And you can listen to all of our episodes at seeyouincourtpodcast.org. And now they're on YouTube as well, which is interesting. So we hope you've enjoyed it, and thank you for listening. And until next time, we'll see you in court.
You've been listening to the See You in Court podcast, brought to you by the Georgia Civil Justice Foundation. Remember, justice is a shared journey, and your engagement makes all the difference. For further insight and resources, visit our website at www.seeyouincourtpodcast.org. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at See You in Court Podcast for additional content. And don't forget to engage with our community on Facebook.com/seeyouincourtpodcast. Special thanks to our producer, Philip Hoover. I'm Fred Smith, Executive Director of the Georgia Civil Justice Foundation. You may learn more about the foundation at www.fairplay.org. Until next time, we'll see you in court.